Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. This is another reply video. In this reply video I'm going to be addressing somebody I've not addressed before. This is a YouTube content creator called Morgoth's Review. Now Morgoth is a gentleman from the northeast, speaks with a strong Geordie accent. He makes a few Slaxer-like videos where he goes out and about, but a lot of his work is studio based, and this is one of them. And he does a lot of social commentary, political commentary, things like that. He never turns the camera on himself. I mean, he keeps his identity very carefully guarded, which is understandable in this day and age. I actually invited him once a couple of years ago to Truth Seekers Northeast, and he didn't turn up, or he might have done. He might have been sitting in the back of the room and I never saw him, because no one knows who he is, because well, you know what happens if you tell people who you are and you're a YouTuber. So this particular video is one of his studio works. It's just 13 minutes, just over 13 minutes long. It's called UFOs in Post-Modernity, and he makes some very interesting points which I want to address. And so he begins with this video by showing the ATIP footage, and he does that for the first minute of the video. Of course, we're all familiar with the ATIP footage, and so he starts just after that, and then we'll sort of come to the actual beginning of his commentary.
The Pentagon recently released footage of what they called UFOs.
Well, actually, they don't call them UFOs; they call them UAPs. This is a very important point, because it does say a lot. In fact, it may delve into some of the other issues that Morgoth is going to bring up. The term they used was UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. Now, the reason they call them that, it's simply because UFO, Unidentified Flying Object, is loaded down with so much cultural baggage that if they used it, people would just laugh. I think probably their management in the Pentagon probably says you just can't say UFO because no one takes it seriously. And there's a reason for that, a reason I have gone into before, and it's to do with the fact that there is this atmosphere, this pall of sort of frivolity and novelty surrounding UFOs, and that's even the term UFO. So you can't even use the term, even though the term UFO actually didn't exist until I think it was not the Condom Committee. I think it was actually the CIA. It was the CIA actually came up with it. I think it was the other committee. I can't remember what it is now. It'll come to me in a minute. But that was the one in the early 50s. Before that, they were just called flying saucers or men from Mars, things like that. And there is, like I said, it's all to do with the way UFOs are portrayed in the media, and there's a reason for how they've been presented to us by the authorities.
Though they meant it in the true meaning of the word, they had video of objects flying at high speed, which they claimed they couldn't explain.
It's true. I don't think they can. They can. Funnily enough, there's been some videos lately since the big news which occurred a couple of days ago, which I did. If you follow Herpanwo Voice and the words and what I write on there on the Herpanwo Voice blog, I'm terribly sorry. Liberace, he's moved on from the piano. He started taking up singing. So there's nothing I can do about that. Yeah, the Herpanwo Voice blog, I did an article on there on when it was actually this declassification took place, and the headlines were Pentagon releases this footage. In a sense, that's kind of a formality, because of course they've already been leaked. All they were doing was declassifying this footage, officially declassifying the footage. Has already been fallen into the hands of the press, and therefore has entered the public domain thanks to Tom DeLonge and the TTSA. It's kind of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. I mean, there are distinctive reasons why the formal declassification of the ATIP footage is important, which I will have to make another video on, I think, because it's beyond the scope of this particular one. But yeah, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, they mean it literally in the same way as an honest person uses the term UFO. We don't know what it is, we can't explain it.
Looking at the footage, I couldn't help but notice how retro and dated it all seemed. And when I browsed the reactions on social media, I saw that I wasn't the only one. In fact, the general consensus seemed to be that the UFOs in the grainy black and white footage were a bit naff and a bit cringe. There was a few people saying it was the government.
All right, yeah. I'll go back a little bit because he makes another point in a minute. I think maybe this is part of the internet culture, which Morgoth is going to talk about more in a little while. How we all expect products, information to be delivered to us, and we expect it to be delivered perfectly. So we expect perfect images. It's true. I mean, there were terms like cringe, naff, retro. Yeah, it is. But the reason is because this is official U.S. Navy gun camera footage. Now, this military camera work is not intended to create nice pictures for people to enjoy. It's intended to identify targets, discern them from other objects which might be friendly, such as merchant ships and civilian aircraft, and basically create a firing solution on them. Therefore, they're going to look retro. They're not going to look nice. We're looking at basically we're looking at grayscale images and thermal images. That is FLIR, the forward-looking infrared scanner, which the aircraft will look in. So yeah, it's not the best pictures in the world. I'm the first to admit it. I've seen far better UFO footage than that. But it's if you get over that, if you get over the aesthetics of it, you have to realise these are extremely significant images. If you look at them for what they are rather than what they're supposed to be in the cyberspace, which Morgoth's going to talk more about in a minute. We ought to be, whether we are or not, we ought to be very excited.
There was a few people saying it was the government directing people's attention away from current world realities.
No, it's not. I mean, if I wanted to direct people away from current world realities, well, there's other ways of doing that, such as soap operas, Love Island, reality TV, light entertainment. There's all kinds of things you can do. There's various celebrity scandals. There's minor political scandals. Directing people away by creating some elaborate UFO hoax, no, that wouldn't work. It's using it, and essentially, it would draw people. What's more, it would draw people's attention towards far bigger secrets. Now, you don't want to do that. You don't want to try and cover up a secret with something that might lead people towards a bigger secret. That's like trying to cool down red hot metal by putting it into a tab of by putting it into a crucible of molten metal. You put it into water if you want to cool it down.
But mainly, people reacted with cynicism and mockery. And it seemed to me that 30 or 40 years ago, footage like that released would have seemed earth-shattering to the people around at the time. A revelation, or at least something which stirred up a lot of debate and discussion. Yet it sank within a few hours and nobody cared.
Yeah, I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if this material had been released maybe 30, 40 years ago, or even maybe 20 years ago. I think it would have had a different reaction. Which the irony is that crazy tinfoil hat wearing, lunatic, conspiracy believing ufologists like me have been saying in those days that such evidence existed. Now, we were laughed at, weren't we? We were laughed at. But I mean, now of course it's come out, and I assumed that this would hit the water with a bigger ripple than it did. Now, is that good or bad? I was talking about this on Third Rail Radio with Trevor. If you watch Third Rail Radio, the show I present with Trevor Murray, about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because we compared it to things such as Bigfoot. If it suddenly turned out that Bigfoot was alive, what would the result be? It's possible that it could be both good or bad, that people seem to be responding to this without grabbing their torches and pitchforks, or indeed running for the shelters in the woods. This could mean that the problems that I've often predicted would happen with disclosure with a capital D may not be as bad as I thought they would, as they're often described, for instance, in AD After Disclosure by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel, and of course, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure by someone called Ben Emlyn Jones, who's never heard of him. Available at all good bookshops now. The problems that I describe in that book, and indeed Dolan and Zabel describe in their book, may not come to pass in quite the same way. That's the good side of it. The bad side of it is, though, that it could be a symptom of a complete inability to comprehend rather than simply taking it in their stride. That's a concern of mine. Now, if that's the case, then we're in trouble, I think, because it means essentially there's no imperative at all for any kind of disclosure with a capital D or small d anymore, because there's only a handful of internet enthusiasts like myself who believe in it. Anyway, go on, Morgoth.
Except to laugh at how dated it all seemed. Where do UFOs fit into today's culture? That makes you ask.
Where do they fit in? Yeah, I mean, this is such a big question that I can't answer it right now. I've done several videos on this subject. I've written a bloody book on it. Three books actually. There's sequels to that. The answer is I don't know exactly. This is something that I've got to think about. Morgoth's asked a good question. Definitely.
You don't seem to hear much about them anymore. They do indeed seem to be a cultural artefact from a bygone age. 1950s America mainly, and the Midwest of America at that. Farmers seeing strange lights and odd shapes in the clouds. Maybe a new secret weapon from the government was testing out. And in the background the Cold War played out, and all those unidentified and unexplained objects may well have been the godless commies spying on the good folk of Idaho.
Yeah, that is a kind of cultural landscape that he's just described. There is indeed a cultural interpretation for UFOs. I'll come on to that because I'll read you the comment I left Morgoth on the video. I did it on both the BitChute and the YouTube copies, where I discussed this. But people often say, well, UFOs are interpreted in a cultural manner, the mass psychology of the people who have to experience them. Yes, like everything else. Now, the Cold War, there's definitely this Cold War element to them, absolutely. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, but the politics of the Cold War are inevitably caught up in this, because the whole world was locked between the two superpowers, that is the Soviet Union, the socialist bloc, and the capitalist democratic West. It's more complicated today, which is why possibly the way UFOs are portrayed in the media has changed so radically since December 2017. I've done other videos about that as well. But one thing I've got to say, he talks about Arizona. He mentions Idaho. He's very much, Morgoth focuses very much on the United States of America when it comes to this subject. And indeed, it's easy to believe that when you consider that the US is probably the country that discusses them. I think it's almost ironic when I say this, but the US is the subject almost which discusses it most openly. Which is ironic. The irony is that the US seems to be at the centre of this cover-up. There, for some reason, this one country appears to be the instigators of the global policy, which I've talked about on, like, my Nottinghamshire Roswell case. But in terms of the media, it's fictional media. I mean, no one addresses it more than the United States. All the big series and films which we're going to talk about, which Morgoth talks about in here, is indeed a product of the United States. But at the same time, UFOs are a worldwide phenomenon. UFOs exist in every country, every culture. And they go back through time, through history, into prehistory. It's a perennial part of the human experience to have this phenomenon with us. Different people in different cultures in different parts of the world, and at different times, different ages, cast a different interpretation, different context onto them, depending on their culture, their level of technology, things like that, at the time, the age they lived in. So carry on, Morgoth.
The zeitgeist that spawned the UFO had many component parts, not just the Cold War, but the fact that space missions were actually being launched. Western man's horizons were expanding into the void, as was his scientific expertise. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, man began to realise his smallness in the universe.
Now, spawned. Morgoth just said spawned the UFO. Now, the UFO phenomenon. Now, that's actually that's factually incorrect. I think what he probably may be referring to here, correct me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, Morgoth, but is the advent of the modern UFO era, which began quite precisely in quite precisely in 1947. We can time it very precisely to the Kenneth Arnold event. Roswell followed within the week. Then there was the Maury Island incident and things like that. And before you know it, we're UFO crazy. I mean, it's funny. I was looking at some old cave paintings showing distinctly alien-like beings. These, I think, were from northern Mexico, and they date back thousands of years. And yet there's still this sense, and the skeptics, people like what's his name? Not Ed Dutton. No, not Ed Dutton. What's his name? Brian Dunning. He claims, it's all a product of the media. It's all a product. It all began in the mid 1940s with science fiction films. Before that, there were no UFOs. There were no aliens. And I listen to what he says, and indeed I look at these cave paintings and I think, you're disconnected from reality, mate. You really are. I mean, I don't think Morgoth is suggesting that the same thing that Dunning was, but it's spawned him. No, it's not that. I mean, of course, that humans' first adventures into space, at least publicly. I'm not going to get into the secret space program here, but this began with Sputnik in 1957. Of course, that was a radical transformation of our position, our place in the universe. We left our home world for the first time in public perception, and that course inspired people to look at the UFO phenomenon in a different way. Again, it really, really did. Absolutely no doubt about that.
And through the threat of nuclear war, his vulnerability as well. We had just one planet, and that planet was nothing but a mote of dust and a vast godless nothing. And popular scientists like Carl Sagan promoted the smallness of man to massive audiences. According to people like Sagan, a nuclear war on Earth would be the end of life on Earth. But to the universe, it'd be not much more than a match going out.
Right, Carl Sagan. If you haven't seen it already, do please go and watch my talk. I mean, the best copy is probably the one I did at East Anglia UFO Group. I've actually recorded that myself. It's on Panwo TV. It's SETI and UFOs. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and UFOs. So I go into Carl Sagan in great detail there, because the things Carl Sagan said, I think, were influenced by his need, I think, to care for the well, I think he may have seen it as caring for the public in the face of a reality which he denied, and that reality was the UFO phenomenon.
It was meaningless and insignificant. Even science fiction as a popular form came into its own during these decades, and it's fair to say Hollywood actively encouraged the UFO hysteria.
Right, I think UFO hysteria, I think, is a misnomer. But yeah, of course. I mean, of course, they did. I mean, they did make a lot of movies about UFOs. In fact, as Robbie, if you look at Robbie Graham's presentations or read his books, it's quite clear he studied the relationship between UFOs and cinema in great detail. UFOs are probably the biggest subject of cinema in terms of the number of films made and the popularity of those films. I think he discovered that 15 out of the top 20 films ever made had the theme of UFOs in them. That's quite something, isn't it? I mean, I know I've seen some of these films that are really good. There's some really great ones, such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's some not so great ones, like Independence Day, things like that. But Hollywood, of course, on one level wanted to exploit the zeitgeist that Morgoth mentioned, because firstly it was a grassroots up kind of movement, and of course making films about that is going to encourage people to come and see them. On the other hand, there is a top-down flow of information too, in the sense that there are some of these productions from Hollywood that contain disinformation. That's deliberate. That is a fact, and these things go in both directions. It's worth, like I say, Look at Robbie Graham for more details on this. Very fascinating chap. Unfortunately, we're not on good terms on a personal level. Such is internet drama. But still, he's still someone I admire professionally, if not personally.
But then again, scientists did actually have perfectly sensible arguments that life did actually exist elsewhere in the cosmos. It was just a numbers game, really. The chances of primitive life emerging on a planet
The
were
Drake
tiny,
equation.
let alone advanced intelligence. But the universe was so massive, and there were so many planets out there that life, and even life more advanced than human, was a statistical certainty. Believing in aliens was therefore rational, once you knew the numbers and scales involved.
Yeah. But what Morgoth has basically just described here is the mindset behind SETI. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. He brings up the idea of primitive life developing into species more advanced than us, and the fact that it's simply considering the infinite nature of the universe. It's not a question of has it happened. It has to have happened. The question is, where are they, and can we talk to them? That's really the mentality behind SETI. But it is, to quote Stanton Friedman, a silly effort to investigate. That's what it stands for. And that's basically because when people are looking out there saying, well, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? The answer is they're already here. They're on this earth with us already. They found us. We don't, if we want to talk to them, we don't. If we point telescopes at the side trying to talk to them, it's worse. It's worse than like shouting at somebody a long distance away when he's standing behind, just behind your back. That's actually an understatement by far to describe the contradiction in between reality and mindset. So, yeah, I mean, but the fact of the matter is, we should not be surprised that we find life out there, but also whether it's here or not, I think, is a question of evidence, and the evidence suggests that it is. Life out there has already reached us.
In Hollywood, movies of the era, the UFOs and aliens were very often just a stand-in for the Soviet Union. On a more sophisticated level, it questioned whether the government was to be trusted, as in the Area 51 and Roswell conspiracies. Or
now the Area 51, okay, like as for Cold War propaganda, stand-in for the Soviet Union, yeah. I mean, have you seen Invaders? Let me just try and find the titles for Invaders. Here we go. Invaders is bloody. I'll go to Google. I won't use YouTube. I don't want Invaders. The Invaders. It's The Invaders. Here we go. The Invaders. It's an American science fiction television series created by Larry Cohen, aired on ABC from 1960. Just 2 seasons, 1967 to 68. Yes, it's only ran for like 2 years, but it's very, very interesting because it's about it's the opening to the whole thing. I won't play it because I'll end up with another bloody copyright strike. But the opening sequence, yeah, here we go. There's the Invaders. What happens is you have a chap called architect David Vincent. Yeah, it's David Vincent, who's an architect, very sort of benign profession. A bit like what's his name, Charles Bronson's profession in Death Wish. The Invaders, alien beings from a dying planet. This is what it says. Their destination to the Earth. Their purpose is to make it their world. And what happens is David Vincent is like driving along. Yeah, David Vincent has seen them. For him, it began one lost night on a lonely country road, looking for a shortcut that he never found. It began with a closed, deserted diner, and a man too long without sleep to continue his journey. And he's sort of sitting in his car like this behind the steering wheel, really tired. And suddenly, you see this flying saucer landing in the background. And it says it began with the landing of a craft from another galaxy. That's a long way away, isn't it? Now David Vincent knows that the invaders are here. They've taken human form. Somehow he must convince a disbelieving world that the nightmare has already begun. Yeah, I mean, this flying saucer went and landed. Even when I was a little kid, I thought this when I watched it. I mean, you might as well have had like a hammer and sickle on it. Yeah, and it even says here on the Wikipedia page, Cold War allergy. Cold War allegory. Yeah, Cold War fantasy. The invaders is often appeared to reflect Cold War fantasies of communist infiltration that had lingered from the McCarthy period a decade earlier. The series creator Larry Cohen has acknowledged that this was intended along with the political themes for the series. Cohen also acknowledged he was not the first to turn Cold War fears into science fiction drama. Such fears had influenced films such as The Invasion of the Body Snatchered and I Married a Monster from Outer Space. So that's kind of like very thinly veiled Cold War propaganda. So I knew exactly what I know what Morgoth meant. What Morgoth meant is essentially there's lots of examples like that. Excuse me. Now, as far as the Area 51 and Roswell conspiracy theories, that's totally different. That's not connected to the first point that Morgoth was making, even though I think he sees the two together. They're totally different. The Area 51 and Roswell conspiracies come from literally a different source, from an incident actually did happen, and the supposition that a secret government base has been used to study the crash retrieval. This material that was secretly salvaged in July of 1947 from New Mexico and was studied. It was secretly salvaged and kept quiet by the government. These are real, that's the point. And Area 51, again, it's real. There's a factual underpinning to this. So we'll carry on here.
The idea that UFOs were advanced spying equipment.
Well, they are in a way. I mean, whether maybe people thought they were Russian. I mean, possibly they are. Obviously, they're taking an interest in us. So, advanced spying equipment, whether manned or unmanned, they are.
Maybe it was the fact that alien life probably was out there, according to the scientists. But in every case, it spoke to an us and them mentality. We knew who we are. We also know who we're not. But we do know we're vulnerable, whether from atom bombs or a death ray.
Now the thing is, it's an important point actually. He comes back to this subject of whether we know who we are or whether we know who we're not, and he said back then everyone knew who they were not, and now we don't. The question that the important point here, which he has overlooked, is we don't know who they are. That, I think, is the underpinning of all the fascination and the fear surrounding UFOs. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they come from. We know they exist. We know there are several different kinds. We know they display a wide array of motives, agendas, and they exhibit a wide range of behavior. But who are they? They've never definitively explained that. Okay. Now what happens over the next few minutes, I will play it, is there's a little interlude here where Morgoth plays some music and he shows some images. Now the images he shows are very interesting because he starts off, Colin Woolford, if you're listening, he starts off with a still from the alien autopsy footage, the Ray Santilli film. Then he moves on to pictures of nuclear bombs exploding. He shows images of nuclear tests. You've seen the images of houses blowing apart from the shockwave and things like that. So that's the interlude that takes place, and then half a minute later he continues. Let me just check the time. Yeah, to.
But on another level, it speaks to an outward-looking civilization reaching its furthest expanse, encapsulated by the question, are we alone? Yeah,
I mean, this comes back to the point about space exploration. We are creatures who, for the first time, ventured out into space. We saw rockets going up. We met men orbiting the Earth. We saw men walking on the moon. Things like that, allegedly. As I said, I'm just to treat this whole video for the convenience of the points being made as if the secret space program never happened and all of space history is correct. Okay, that's just for the convenience of the points being made. The points being made is we saw ourselves exploring space for the first time. This turned our attention towards space in a way that it never turned before. This led us to ask, who's out there apart from us? If we've done it, others can from other planets. Are there people on Mars? Are there people on Venus? Have they achieved this same level of technology that we have? In which case, could we actually travel to meet each other? That's a very important. That's a very important and seismic cultural shift.
The culture surrounding UFOs and aliens went mainstream in the 90s. X-Files turned the deep lore into one of the most popular cultural products of the era. But with the 90s came Generation X, and with...
All right. Now, it's odd to think about UFOs because it went mainstream in the 90s. I mean, in a sense, I think there's always been this. I mean, I don't think X-Files was a very important series, because you can talk about X-Files a bit more, because it popularised the idea of conspiratorial ufology, probably in a way that other series hadn't. But it was not. It was not unique, nor was it the first time that these concepts had emerged. Now, I've talked before about, in my reviews of Project Blue Book, about a program called Project UFO that came out in the 70s. Now, it was similar to Project Blue Book in that the two main characters were Project Blue Book investigators, and they went around looking into various UFO encounters. It was a series I used to watch when I was a kid. I remember quite enjoying it. But it has this naivety to it, because the idea of government complicity in secrecy is never even considered. With Project Blue Book, as you know, that underpins the entire premise of the series, as it does X-Files. So I think it may be X-Files, like Project Blue Book, popularised that concept in a way that it hadn't done before. Nevertheless, the idea of UFOs and even exopolitical points existed before X-Files. In fact, I've done an entire presentation called "The History of Exopolitics," where I talk about basically exopolitical ideas go back as far as ufological ones do. So conspiratorial ufology has always been there. There's always been this question, this conspiratorial question. It can be found in politics. I mean, I've talked about the Grenada Initiative, Eric Gary, things like that. Watch that anyway. Watch that particular. I'm going to put links in the bloody description box. Hang on. Let me just go to my notes. Exo history and SETI. All right, there we go. So that's. I'll put those links in. All right. Deary Ben. Oh, deary Ben. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. But it's odd actually that UFOs are in a sense mainstream, as we discussed. It's one of the most popular themes in cinema. TV series about UFOs always do very well. UFO documentaries are always quite popular on channels such as TLC, TVN, Discovery History. There's lots and lots of documentaries about UFOs. Again, they vary in quality enormously. Generally, if they're older, they're better when it comes to the documentaries. But despite that, why is it that UFOs are still held in this position where they have this kind of cultic mystique? If you say you're into UFOs, you'll still get laughed at. Fingers will point at you, and people will sing the X-Files theme. And I think it's got a lot to do with the massive amount of disinformation that was fed to us from the 1940s onwards through the Twining Memo. And that only changed that in December 2017. It was literally a 70-year policy which absolutely remained unanimously the same. I mean, no one ever even questioned it. There's almost no deviation from that. And then that transformed in December 2017. And why that happened, I don't know. This is something that goes beyond this is something possibly Morgoth has not actually thought about or come across that information. But it could explain why there's this odd duality to the UFO phenomenon between it being so popular, so mainstream, at the same time so fringe. And I think it still is, perhaps even more today than ever before.
Generation X came irony, lots of irony. Now the 50s would be looked back at with a knowing smirk and wink. It was lovable kitsch with terrible special effects. Every theory had been turned into a t-shirt and series which could be watched on primetime TV.
Generation X refers to, I think it's people, I mean, technically I'm Generation X, I don't want to I don't want to give my actual age away, but I'm sort of Generation X. It refers to people, generation born after the baby boomers, roughly from the early 1960s to the late 1970s. That's it, basically the children of the baby boomers. I mean, well, actually, my parents were early boomers, and I'm sort of late Gen X. Then came the millennials, and then Gen. There's all kinds of different names for different generations. No, I don't know. The irony, I think. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that. Maybe I haven't watched enough of his videos. I think I've watched most of them, but yeah, I mean the whole thing about special effects. Now, I believe that really there was no real change. What you'll find is that newer UFO series and UFO movies tend to complement the older ones. I mean, Morgoth actually shows a still from the movie, not in this scene, in a previous scene. He shows a still from the film Earth vs. Flying Saucers, which is a 1956 movie, and that's a very it is a bit kitsch. I mean, you have like these saucers. You've probably seen that clips of it. It's the one basically was that they have these flying discs, which were parodied by Tim Burton in Mars Attacks. These flying discs that make whirring noises, and they attack the Earth. It's a really good alien invasion movie. It's actually a lot better than it looks when you first see the clips because of the bad special effects. It's pretty well researched, actually. They did consult ufologists, and indeed J. Allen Hynek was consulted for the creation of Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. So a lot of these older UFO series and movies are actually quite good, and I think the newer ones complement them. They complement each other. But yeah, I mean, people can laugh at special effects, but at the end of the day, special effects and things like that, and production design, that doesn't really make a movie, does it? I mean, I've talked about this before. You know, one of my favourite science fiction series is Blake 7, which was famous for its very homespun special effects and scenery. You know, cardboards, very obviously cardboard scenery. You can see it moving in some of the scenes. Yeah. So really, there's kind of a continuum when it comes to UFOs being portrayed in the media, and again, that goes back to the Twining memo, official ridicule and denial, things like that. So let's carry on. So go on to 557.
Existential threats had become easy to watch entertainment.
And I'll go back a little bit.
Existential threats had become easy to watch and series which could be watched on primetime TV. Existential threats had become easy to watch entertainment.
Yeah, threat. See, this is basic psychology. I don't think there's a conspiracy here, but aren't existential threats always entertaining? There's always an entertaining side to them. Threats excite us. Fear makes us respond with humour. There is a thrill-chasing element to most people, and of course, UFOs induce fear in people, which is why we respond with fascination, sometimes with humour. This is why we love war. You know, we love war movies. Most people like war movies. Most people like action films for that same reason. And UFOs are a part of that. And of course, they're going to end up on primetime TV. I mean, as I said, there is a grassroots upwards flow to this kind of issue, which is not necessarily sinister. It's almost inevitable. In fact, it's almost a healthy sign. The fact that and as I've done, I've written an article called "Some of Them on Our Side." I'm not going to put a link to that, but I've discussed this in other films. You don't actually you don't actually get a monopoly of disinformation in Hollywood, especially now and on TV. Now more than ever, things have changed, but there's always been genuine dissent from the narrative that the Illuminati wants us to have. There always has been. They do not have a monopoly. They really, really don't.
UFO was either a bin laid on a piece of string to be laughed at, or a 20 miles across CGI monster that could blow up whole cities.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? You get this. I mean, there's nothing else quite like it. You could turn on the TV news and they have like the novelty piece at the end where everyone in the studio has a good laugh, where you literally do have like some cardboard thing wrapped in tinfoil, and they dangle it above the camera frame, and everyone in the studio has a good laugh, and they play the X-Files song. And then you watch some adverts, and what comes on? Independence Day. Big 20-mile wide super city killers with beams of light and rather unrealistic, nasty-looking aliens. So it's odd. They make jokes about it one minute, and they portray them as planet killers the next. And there's of course there's a psychological element to that, as I've just described, but also it's testament to how there's this strange contradiction as well in the way what UFOs actually are, and how people in power want us to see them.
How could questions about aliens and conspiracies be taken seriously in the age of South Park and The Simpsons? The Simpsons creators even produced a spin-off called Futurama, which mined the rich vein of ironic nostalgia that the 90s ushered in. Who could seriously consider the idea of alien abduction in an age when Cartman on South Park gets abducted and then anally probed by a UFO and aliens?
I've not seen that episode actually. I've not. I've also never seen Futurama, oddly enough, because I like The Simpsons an awful lot. Now, The Simpsons really used to like poking fun at UFOs and conspiracy theories. In fact, the characters Mulder and Scully from the X-Files actually appear in an episode of The Simpsons. It's a really good episode because Homer actually meets an alien in the woods. It turns out to be Mr. Burns. Spoiler alert. But it's a really good series because it's actually, I don't mind people having a laugh with us. I really, really don't. It's good that they're having a laugh because people are making a laugh out of something that people have knowledge about. I've not seen the episode of South Park, but I know South Park is, Trey Parker and the other guy who makes South Park. They're very switched on. Actually, they're quite based. And you see it in some of South Park. South Park, again, it's crude animation. It's rather like the Monty Python animation, just little cutouts. But it's really well written. It's funny, and it's quite intelligent.
Cold War had ended, and we supposedly reached the end of history. Yet if 1998 was the end of history, it seemed like the West, and especially America, would spend eternity laughing at the past, while increasingly fearing their own governments. But even that...
this end of history thing. Now the end of history, there was this idea actually in the late 90s that in the post-Cold War hubris that really capitalist democracy had won everything, and Russia was now becoming democratic at that time. They went through a bit of turmoil in the 90s, but it was finally settling down with Yeltsin, Putin, and people like that. And then there was this idea that basically that whole concept would inherit the Earth. There was a book called The End of History by a guy called Francis Fukuyama, which I've read actually, and I think events since then have disproved it. But at the time, people saw the Berlin Wall coming down, and the fact that the Cold War had been so instrumental in political rhetoric for so long, basically from the end of World War II, that it's easy to see that when the Cold War ends, because of all the rhetoric that of course portrayed it as the only issue affecting the entire world, everything tied back to the Cold War. So when the Cold War suddenly ended, it ended very suddenly, literally within about 4 years. It took with Mikhail Gorbachev coming to power. And basically the whole thing collapsed. But in 91, the Soviet Union itself ended. It was very easy to believe that with that would follow utopia. That was... And the whole purpose of history, it's almost Marxist, this idea. That history was purposive, it was leading up to an appointed end. That end would not be like communism, but it would be democratic capitalism. And Fukuyama was one of these principal theorists, but it didn't work out. But that's it's interesting. This was the same period that X-Files came out and things like that.
Didn't escape the irony. The 90s were marked by self-awareness, by people being taken outside of their narratives and being made conscious of their own cliché. The fact that the X-Files promoted a theory that amounted to the government covering up aliens speaks to an age of comfort and even naivety, an era without a founding event, or an era waiting for a founding event.
Now, you may know, you may be able to guess where Morgoth is going with this, because of course this post Cold War hubris ended very abruptly on September 11th, 2001. However, I'm not sure there's a direct causal link between the rise of conspiratorial ufology in the mainstream via X-Files and that post-Cold War, the initial post-Cold War period. I'm not sure there's a connection there. And he talks about these things being naive. No. I mean, if you really believe that your government is, and you have evidence to believe that your government is covering up the existence of extraterrestrial life, intelligent extraterrestrial life that exists not out there but down here with us, and you have evidence for it, how can you possibly call that naive? I think what Morgoth really is kind of like saying, it's like, I get the feeling what he's actually saying is a bit, it's kind of a bit like he's assuming there is something kind of ephemeral to this. It's not really as serious, is it, as 9/11? So he uses the word quaint. I mean, he hasn't yet. He will in a minute.
How quaint Roswell seemed now. All those poorly shot photos of clouds and what was probably geese and spy planes.
Well, there you are. See, I think he is now basing this, what he's about to say and what he's just said, his analysis of 9/11 comes from this idea that really the whole UFO conspiratorial mindset was emerged because of people basically who lived in such luxury. They had nothing else to do, so they conjured up some kind of fantasy. And he talks about geese, spy planes, clouds. No, that's not what. There are people who take pictures of those things and thinks they're UFOs, but no, that's not what they are. That's not what they are, Morgoth. They are real. There's a factual underpinning to all this.
Now in 2001, we got the event from multiple angles and in high definition. Only 46% of Americans believe the official 9/11 narrative.
That's actually, this is important because in a sense, we went from one conspiracy to another, or you could say, you could say that there's a connection between the two, and maybe I'll come on to that. I think maybe we should come on to the fact that there is a connection. Indeed, that will come up. That idea will come up. But hang on, where was I? Yeah. Now, the 46%, that's great. I mean, however, I mean, before you get too excited, this is if you add in lie hop, that let it happen on purpose. That is, if you word the question, did the government lie about the truth about 9/11, and people say, oh yeah, they did. The thing about it is they lied because they knew they knew that these terrorists from Al Qaeda were going to hit us, and well, they covered it up because they were incompetent. They couldn't stop them. That's one level of it. There's also, oh well, they decided in the end to put the guard down because they thought, well, if we let them attack us, that'll be a good excuse to do our invasion. Okay, those are kind of the two lie hop, the weak and strong lie hop positions. But there's my hop as well, made it happen on purpose, which is the position I take. This is essentially created by the forces which then head on to actually to take on to take on the war on terror, things like that. But let me just look up, what's it, 9/11 conspiracy poll, because I actually did look this up a little while. Opinion polls about 9/11 conspiracy theories. I did an article about this. It turns out it's true. 46% of people. 46% of people actually. There we are. Yeah, the others, it's split very much. There's 15% who are like my hop, that is, made it happen on purpose. That's the position I take. In fact, there's a large don't know sector as well, so it may include one of that. Now, 15% is much lower. 15% is an awful lot lower than 46, but it's still encouraging. It means, when you look around you and you hear people talking about it or not talking about it, it means that people like me who talk about these things are a very small vocal tip of a huge silent iceberg. And I encourage people, I don't just want to tell people, explain to people why my position. I want to encourage the people who already agree with me to speak out as well. And the same goes for the UFOs. I mean, the UFO is much higher, I think. Let's just have a look. UFO opinion polls. Let's have a look what it says here. Oh, no, wait, hang on, I'll go back. I'll go to Google and do it from there again. I was using Wikipedia. Alright, let's see what it says here. News Gallup, here we go. Americans skeptical of UFOs but say government knows more. 2/3 in the US say the government knows more than it's saying about UFOs. 1/3 think some UFOs are actual sightings of alien spacecraft. 1/3. This is Americans. I don't know if it counts for all of us. It also seems to. It's actually dropped slightly. Here we are. In your opinion, does the US government know more about UFOs than it's telling us? In 1996, it was 71%. It was 68% in June last year. Okay, but the no's are 90% 1996, 29%. So there's more no's. So yeah, the undecided have also dropped from 10% to 2%. So that's very minor. That's only slightly. That's only slightly. But that's interesting. It's interesting that actually. Carry on. Where's Morgoth?
The arrival of the internet meant everyone could have their own theory or even create their own theory depending on their own biases and politics.
Well, that's a rather cynical way of putting it. I won't say it's completely incorrect. There's no doubt an element who actually do just that. However, the internet also allows honest people to do research. Not to create based on biases and politics, but to research facts. And I aspire to be part of that group. I really, really do.
Not just on the subject of 9/11 either, but on everything. And what's more, history can be rewritten and interpreted as anybody feels like, with one or two exceptions. Not everything in post-modernity is up for revision, but almost everything is. This is then reinforced in a digital space, a bubble, or what they call an echo chamber.
Now, that's not necessarily true. Again, same point as previously. I'm sure there are people who sit around in an echo chamber. I know people who do that. But me, I go to skeptic events. I'm a member of Oxford Skeptics in the Pub. I want to learn by getting as much information as possible, both pro and con. So again, the internet allows me to do that in a way it may not other people, or may not previously before the internet came along.
But look at the difference between today's counterculture and the age of the UFO. It's the contrast in outward-looking and curious people with a confused and inward-looking people.
In a sense, we're both, aren't we? We're both outward looking and inward looking. There's confusion, but there's also a desire for more knowledge in people today. And maybe this is why it's a good thing to connect UFOs to other conspiracy theories. The fact is that they are linked. I know there's people who don't want that. I know there's people who, for example, when I was in the 9/11 Truth Group, and the leader of the local chapter here in Oxford said quite bluntly to me, if you're going to do a presentation, just stick to 9/11. Don't bring up the UFOs or anything like that. At the same time, Bryce Zabel, after the 2011 Exopolitics conference, because of the number of people with divergent and different, more wide ideas than he had, he wrote an article saying UFOs and 9/11 conspiracy theories don't mix. So both those guys were saying the exact same thing about the exact opposite positions. My answer is I do mix them, and I think they should be for various reasons.
If the big question of the age of the UFO was, are we alone? The question of the digital age is, who are we?
It is a good question, isn't it? I mean, yeah. Are we alone out there? Are there people out there? But what does this say about humans? About who we are? What does it say about the fact that and this goes into a bigger subject. Indeed, Morgoth goes into more detail about this at the end of the video, and I won't cover that because it just goes off in too much of a tangent. But I have made other videos about it. In a sense, there is confusion about our very identity. about our nature, who we are, what our role is in the universe, and indeed it's not accidental that's happened. It's deliberate. Let me just check where the next bit I'm going to.
Physicist Michio Kaku once said that the way humans on Earth behaved in relation to space was tantamount to suicide. Earth, he said, was a very noisy planet which belched out radio waves across space and actively signalled to any potential aliens where we were and how to find us and what we look like and what we...
Morgoth is, incidentally, the slide Morgoth is showing with this narrative is video of the International Space Station from close by. Morgoth's style in the studio, as I've explained, he does an audio narrative and he puts in slides, and sometimes they're still, sometimes they're videos, but they're always silent, apart from that little interlude vignette that came up earlier.
We ate and what we breathed. Right now, old episodes of Dallas and Knight Rider are wafting past distant planets in the solar system.
Well, beyond the solar system now, considering those series come from the 1980s, so they're now like 30 light years odd away, so 30 or 40 light years away. But this is the idea of the advertising, the dangers of radio advertising. And now Stephen Hawking said a bit about this, saying basically we shouldn't be advertising our presence by broadcasting radio waves all over the universe. Now, how do you avoid it though? If we're going to use radio waves, those radio waves are going to go everywhere, aren't they? You can't have directional beams of radio waves. The only way you can do is having wired connections. And indeed, there is more wired connections than there used to be. So in a sense, we're becoming a quieter planet. But as I said, it's a bit of a moot point when you consider that the aliens already know we're here. They not only know we're here, but they've already arrived. They arrived long before we even invented the radio. So it's a bit like shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Really, again, that's that situation like with the ATIP footage. It's we can't exactly declassify ourselves now, can we? It's a bit of a waste of time declassifying ourselves, or put it another way, trying to a more accurate metaphor would be trying to classify our own presence top secret when the universal equivalent of the TTSA has told everyone about us. So yeah, we're going, all that radio stuff's going out there. It's passing different planets. It's light years and light years away. Old episodes of Dallas, old episodes of Knight Rider. They will fall on the ears of somebody. You know, maybe they'll be maybe they'll be friendly, maybe they'll be hostile. I think we'll be okay so long as they don't catch the Crossroads reboot. That would be a disaster.
But we hardly should have worried too much, really. The more digital Earth becomes, the quieter we get. Again, we're turning inward, and the new frontier exists in cyberspace, not actual space.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I've said, the point I made earlier, but we shouldn't need to worry, but for other reasons. But what he says after that is absolutely true. Maybe we are becoming more inward-looking.
Bygone generations in the middle of the 20th century had the endless void and its mysteries impose itself upon them. The UFOs are a manifestation of that. The
UFOs are not a manifestation of that mindset. The UFOs have always existed at a factual level. It is simply that we, as people, have interpreted them differently. We have like a cultural interpretation. As I've explained earlier, we look up at the void, we see things up in the sky, we see them differently depending on who we are, depending on our status, our technology, our culture, and things like that.
Human population who now mainly live in cyberspace have it impose itself on them as well. But there's a difference. Are we alone? And who are we? People from somewhere travelled across Arizona looking for UFOs in the night sky. People from anywhere gaze into the void of cyberspace. In the digital realm, there are infinite numbers of theories and ideologies and infinite hot takes debunking each and every one of them. Ideas pile up like heaps of rubbish.
Some of it's rubbish, not all of it. Some of it's heaps of rubbish. Now, yeah, I mean, I think I don't know which event he's actually referring to, but there's many groups, events, peoples, teams who go to places. Arizona seems to be very popular in the western United States, where you go sky watching. And yeah, I mean, other people again with this inward turning, who are we kind of mindset, look inwards. I mean, could it be, for example, that the darknet horror stories are the equivalent of that, the modern equivalent of that for those kinds of people? It's almost like the equivalent of sky watching, or better still, perhaps ghost hunting. Because with ghost hunting, there's that element of there's that fear element, which is different from sky watching. With ghost hunting, or indeed researching the malign supernatural in any way, you have that. There's that danger. Now, if you go and you just Google darknet horror stories, you'll come up with various videos about people who went on tour and they went exploring the dark web, and they found like all kinds of things, such as the stories are they went to there was like this place where they were killing people. There was this place with all kinds of horrors going on, cannibalism and paedophilia and stuff like this. Maybe that is the cyberspace equivalent of the same thing. I mean, I hope that these darknet horror stories are made up. I think probably they are, but it's just an interesting idea.
And we can sift through them, seeing which one fits, which one is comfortable. It isn't so much that truth doesn't exist, but that everyone has their own truth. The mythology of the UFO is just one narrative in the junk pile of post-modernity.
It's not a junk pile. It's a narrative that may be unfairly positioned there, simply because that it does have a factual base. If it's interpreted in a certain way, that's possibly because it's been lost in the noise of nonsense, which you quite rightly, Morgoth, say exists. But however, there's also the fact that there is a cover-up. Roswell was a cover-up of an extraterrestrial craft. That did happen, and indeed there's been attempts, and still are attempts, to maintain that cover-up.
It isn't as immediate as the coronavirus lockdown, and it isn't as seismic as 9/11. It just doesn't really matter anymore. It's irrelevant. It's cringe.
It shouldn't be, though, cringe. I mean, I don't consider it cringe. I really don't. I consider it one of the most, in fact, along with other what you call conspiracy theories, the most important issue affecting the world today. If people think it's cringe, they've misunderstood it, possibly because of the disinformation, or possibly because of distractions.
Is there life in the stars? Who cares? It's something to be pondered over before moving on to a new TikTok video.
And it shouldn't be, should it? I'm surely you don't agree with that, Morgoth. It's the most important subject in the universe, like I've said, whether we're alone or not. It's like Robinson Crusoe sitting on an island thinking, am I going to get rescued? I mean, there's some people who literally see it that way. They believe the aliens are our saviours. Others believe they are literally extraterrestrial man-eating nasty boys like the ones in Independence Day. The truth is a mixture of those things.
The big questions have no right to any more importance than whatever is trending on Twitter. Ideas and
Well, they do for me.
Concepts in cyberspace are like objects in real space. They operate without gravity. And
That's a very observant analogy. It's true. That's a good way of saying it. No gravity, yeah.
in the digital space, you can be anything you want, but what's more, you no longer need to drive a pickup truck across a scenic landscape to see the universe. Now you can command your own space empire without even leaving your bed.
Yeah, it's much more fun, isn't it, to go sky watching in Arizona. I love sky. I've been to Devon, never been to Arizona. I do hope to get to Arizona.
On the same year Voyager 2 left the solar system and entered deep space, we saw men competing with women in lifting competitions because we lost the ability to define even the most fundamental aspects of identity.
Now, the whole cultural Marxism thing is a big subject, and indeed Morgoth kind of dedicates the last few minutes of the video to that, and I won't go into it simply because I want to focus on this particular issue alone, because there's not really, I don't think there's a solid connection between the two. But it's still a good point. I mean, why? What about me? What do I do? Am I detaching myself from natural senses by going into cyber senses? I mean, I don't believe it's as extreme as what Morgoth is saying. Certainly not with me. I do want to go sky watching. I went to Devon twice sky watching, and I made videos of that. I've been sky watching elsewhere as well. I would love to go personally to Arizona and sit out with the phone turned off and everything else turned off and just look up into the sky and see if I see anything. But of course, at the same time, when when my computer, I think it was the electricity went off, if you remember rightly, it was at the worst possible time as well. It was that time I went to be interviewed by the police and people wondering where I was. I came back and the electricity was off and I couldn't upload the video, edit or upload the video telling you all I was okay. And it was literally like being on a desert island. I was literally in that position. What can I I thought I phoned up somebody and I said, look, I'm offline, help me. And I suddenly realised that take the internet away from me and what do I have? I've got my two housemates, I've got my dad who doesn't really, he's no interest in anything I say, my brother, my daughter, who again are they're quite normy and blue pilled, and that's about it. There's a guy from the hospital I meet for drinks every 6 months or so, but I'm utterly alone without the internet. I am totally and utterly on an island. So I do know what you mean, Morgoth, I do. At the same time, I'll leave you this comment. I mean, this comment here that I put on the videos itself, on the video underneath Morgoth's video. I said here, UFOs definitely are a cultural artifact, as is everything. However, the foundation of this artifact is a factual phenomenon. What's more, the leaking and eventual declassification of the ATIP footage marks a significant shift in how the phenomenon is portrayed by the media. The way it has not raised as much interest as I thought it would does say a lot, but the change in its portrayal must have happened for a reason. Yeah, there was that quasi fiddler guy on Twitter. Oh, what was it? I can't remember the actual name of the account of the tweet, but he said something like, "It's amazing the government admits UFOs exist, and it's only the second most trending topic on Twitter." So I'm sure Morgoth would raise an eyebrow to that, and he'd be right to. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more to this. I think the Morgoth is taking the cultural shadow cast by the UFO on ourselves and treating that as the object, but there is actually something casting that shadow, and I think possibly that's something he's not grasped yet. And indeed, Morgoth, you should have accepted my invitation to come to Truth Seekers Northeast. Come along to the next meeting after the lockdown. But I want to thank Morgoth Reviews for that very interesting video. It really got me thinking. It really got me, encouraged me or inspired me to put photons onto celluloid as I'm doing now. And I want to thank you all for watching. Thanks very much. There'll be another video coming shortly. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.